Welcome to Conversations with the Masters. You know, there was a business book that was a bestseller written years ago called Good to Great. But what's interesting is within 3 years of the publication of that book, almost every company highlighted as great were in dramatic decline. What happened? Well, first of all, they failed to anticipate disruptions using hard trends that were shaping the future. Secondly, they were good, but they were not distinctive, iconic organizations. Well, we're going to be talking about that right now because what happens when good just isn't good enough? Our expert today is Scott McKain, and he's going to help us learn how to do just that. Scott is a customer experience and sales expert who prepares companies and individual contributors to create distinction and achieve iconic performance. He has written 9 best-selling books, including What Customers Really Want, Create Distinction, and Iconic, How Organizations and Leaders Attain, Sustain, and Regain the Ultimate Level of Distinction. Scott has delivered over 2,000 presentations in 36 countries and works as a consultant and speaker, helping his clients create more compelling connections, provide ultimate customer experiences, and stand out personally and professionally. He is a corporate educator in residence at High Point University, which is named by U.S. News and World Reports as the nation's most innovative university. And he is in the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame and the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame. Now, I could say a lot about Scott. The list would be huge, but let's get Scott in right now and get right down to it. So welcome, Scott.
And Dan, we've been friends for a long time, so I know there are a lot of things you could add, and some I'm glad you didn't. So it's great to be with you today. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, first of all, the book Iconic is an amazing book. And by the way, I'm recommending it highly right now, as well as Create Distinction. You know, to me, they're kind of like a brother-sister type of book that go together. But how do you define an iconic organization? What does that look like? And an iconic culture, for that matter.
Yeah, the iconic organization and in turn, the iconic culture is one that transcends the categorization of its own industry. So, in other words, you might be a very distinctive coffee shop in your respective community that attracts customers, that attracts businesses. But Starbucks is iconic. It's not just the coffee, it is the entire culture and the entire way they do business that other businesses outside that industry would want to emulate. I write in the book Iconic about a steakhouse in Indianapolis, St. Elmo's, that has higher gross revenue than Tavern on the Green in New York City. It's one of the top 15 grossing restaurants in America. How do you do that in Indianapolis? You become such an iconic business that other business leaders in Indianapolis look to that steakhouse for how they might be a better bank or, a better financial advisor or a better manufacturer of diesel engines. All of that by looking at how St. Elmo's treats their employees with their iconic culture and treats their customers with their ultimate customer experience.
So, Scott, a takeaway that I've got right away for the audience, and what I want to do for all of those that are watching is making sure we're giving them some how-tos and some strategies, is having you just say that. I would want to take my business and ask myself, are my competitors, are the people that would be my competition, are they benchmarking against me or am I benchmarking against them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And really do a test on that to see where you are. Are you like 2 or 3 aisles down, or are you at the top?
You bet. And you make it an important point there, Dan, because it's part of what I wrote in the book, Create Distinction, is that one of the 4 cornerstones of distinction is creativity. It's innovation. If you are copying and benchmarking against the competition, then you can only hope to rise to their level of innovation, right? If you're looking at them, then that's all you're going to be able to do. And that creates fundamental problems in differentiating yourself in a competitive marketplace because you're always looked at as a me too. Right? I mean, I stand up in front of audiences and I say, hey, I flew here and we had a lot of fun on the plane and the flight attendants made comedic flight announcements. And it was a lot of fun. No audience member has ever raised their hand and said, man, you flew American. I mean, everybody knows I was on Southwest. And so if another airline tried to copy that, the immediate passenger response would be, man, they're ripping off Southwest. Right. And that's what some of the other airlines. JetBlue is the one that first comes to mind for me. They wanted to be a low-cost competitor. So what did they do? They were the first to put DirecTV in every seat back, and they were the first to do some of the other aspects that they do to set themselves apart so that they would be distinctive even within their own industry. So to attain iconic level, you don't have to be a major corporation, a multinational organization. You can be a steakhouse in Indianapolis. There's a brewery here in Las Vegas that I talk about. There's a hotel in Scottsdale that are really the perfect examples of what it takes to stand out and earn more because they attract customers in a more compelling manner than their competition.
Yeah, and what I'm also noticing about every example you gave is it is customer experience based.
Yeah.
In other words, it's about the emotion that you leave with. It's about the feeling that you have as a user of a product, or as a whether you're eating a meal or whether you're on an airplane. So it's about so I love the idea of innovation and creativity and doing something unique. In other words, what is your uniqueness?
Yes,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
and do your customers know that uniqueness, or do you think?
And that's, and Dan, you have really hit on one of the most challenging aspects of this, and that is people will say, well, distinction, you're just using another word for differentiation. No. And here's the difference. We see so many organizations that say, oh, we're going to do something innovative, or we're going to do something distinctive, but yet it doesn't have traction with customers. I heard one speaker say, different is better than better. And I want to jump up and call time out. I don't think that's it. If I slap every customer in the face, I'm different.
Right, exactly.
They're never coming back to do business with me again, right? But I'm unique. I'm different. So what distinction is finding ways that are meaningful to your customers that show something that sets you apart from the competition. So you start out with clarity, being precise, and then within that clarity, then you get creative and you innovate.
Yeah, what came to my mind is focusing on exceeding expectations. Because if all you're doing is meeting expectations, you will not be distinctive and you will not be iconic. But if you can look at what does my customer expect and use that as your lowest bar,
yeah,
and then exceed. So in other words,
can I piggyback on that for a second, Dan? Sorry, I want to piggyback because there's something you said I think I want to interject, and that is in research what those expectations are. You and I have both worked with organizations that say their goal is to exceed customer expectations, but yet they haven't done the research into determining what their customers truly expect. They go on what they feel they expect, what they think they expect, maybe what the salespeople told them that their customers expect, but they haven't done the hard work to really determine what the actual expectations of those customers are. So they're trying to meet or exceed an expectation that they haven't thoroughly analyzed and researched so that they have the hard data and really understand, because if they don't understand that, then they can't exceed those expectations. So sorry to interrupt, but
no. Well, I'm going to interrupt you right now
because I know it's one that you and I agree on there.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Plus, there's another little caveat to that.
Yeah.
If you did that research and you know what your customers expect, is that 2 years old? Is that research 3 years old?
Right. Moving target, isn't it?
Yeah. Because we all are changing what we expect. We're changing our expectations almost on a daily basis right now. So that better be current research, and you better be checking it again next year, because you know what? It's going to change again.
Oh, and how many organizations, if I hate to pick on any one particular, industry, but,
so many.
but yeah, there's so many, but like cable television, why did so many of us want to cut the cord? Well, our expectation was the service was going to stink. So you're going to exceed that expectation? Well, that's not setting the bar very high, is it? So we also ignore that sometimes we have a group of customers that have this baggage from bad service and bad experience in the past. And so when we ask those customers what they expect, if they're really honest about it, they're not expecting very much because they haven't received very much in the past. And so therefore we really have to your point, it's exactly on target in my opinion. We've got to be current with that research, and we also have to be brutally honest about that research.
Well, you said something earlier. There are 4 areas of distinction that you covered in your book, Creating Distinction. So what are some of the others? And by the way, let's make sure that everyone knows, I think these books go together. Actually, all your books fit together nicely. But I would want you to look at these 4 pillars. So give us another one.
Yeah, the
Innovation,
first one, as I said, was
creativity,
clarity. Then the second is creativity, and then the third is communication. And a lot of organizations think they communicate, but they actually don't. They dump information, but they don't present it in a way that is compelling and memorable. And that's where the power of story comes into play. How are you creating a compelling narrative that people remember? And uh, gosh, I just see so many organizations that put all the data out there thinking that's going to have traction in the marketplace or the features of their product when in fact it means nothing. We're overwhelmed with information. I got to tell you a quick story, Dan. I was doing work for BMW in the United Kingdom, and the CEO of BMW UK took me to dinner, and he was telling me a story. He said 7 years ago, our average customer made about 8 dealership visits to make a purchase decision. Now, not just BMW. They go drive a Mercedes, they go drive an Audi. They would, but he said today it's about 1.3 visits. And I'm like, well, what? And he said, we don't need to be a place they get information anymore. It was that if you wanted information about the car, you went to the dealership and you did a test drive and you talked to a salesperson. Then you went to another dealership and you did the test drive. Now you get online and read the reviews. And now you get online, you read all the specifics, which he said also means we have spent millions of dollars to train our salespeople for a world that no longer exists.
yeah,
We have
exactly.
to teach them to communicate not the facts about our product, but to create the emotional experience that will connect the facts that the prospect has already acquired into something that they would want to purchase. And that's a whole different way of communication.
Well, and you just gave another big one that I want to make sure I'm pointing out here, because here's the question I want all of you to ask yourself. Is your company and all of the things it's known for designed for a world that no longer exists? And by the way, again, COVID changed everything. The last couple of years changed everything, which means, hey, I better be changing some things too. And I want to be, again, not just reactionary, but anticipatory, looking at what are the new tools out there, what are the new expectations, so that I can not meet, but again, exceed. So another key point. Well, I like
and the
where you're
fourth and
going.
final is the customer experience focus. It's something we mentioned earlier, but it's also understanding that to create distinctive and iconic cultures have to look at our teams as internal customers and focus on the experience that they have as well as the external customer experience. And that's why.
Wow. In other words, you could ask your own people, do we have an iconic experience as an employer? Whoa, that would be really, do we have a distinctive culture? Rate it 1 to 10. By the way,
Right.
if we did that, how would most companies come out? Because you work with hundreds of companies, well, thousands over the decades, but you work with so many. How are they coming out in your analysis? If you were going in and looking at some of the really good ones, how good are they?
Not very. They would rather give lip service than customer service, right? Or they based Dan, you made the point perfectly. They base their standard of the customer experience on something that worked pre-COVID, not post-COVID, or it worked 5-7 years ago, but isn't necessarily what customers or employees want today. I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's a reason that we're hearing so much about the Great Resignation and quiet quitting. And there's a reason that companies are saying, well, customers aren't loyal anymore. Well, Apple doesn't have that problem. I can think of a lot of companies that don't have that, but Disney doesn't have that problem. So why? Well, you can say, well, they're in a different industry, but the basics, I believe, are still the same. You create an extraordinary experience that your employees want to repeat and refer, and that creates extraordinary experiences that customers want to repeat and refer. Look, the only way we grow a business is, as you know better than anybody I know, Dan, the only way you grow a business is through retention and acquisition, right? We keep the customers that we have and we get more. I see so many businesses that think they can churn employees and they can churn customers and just keep them coming in the front door. And that is not a sustainable strategy in today's world, because as you said so perfectly, everything has changed.
Yeah. And back to your story, just a little thing to have us think about. He who has the best story wins.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
what's your company story? And by the way, you updated it recently. As a professional, what's your story? You should have one too. All of us should have one. So, and you don't want to be falling asleep while you're telling it. It
Oh,
should be
so
something.
I was doing a project with one of the biggest financial services companies here in the country. And so before the event, I went on the websites of some of the financial advisors that were going to be in the audience. And a high percentage of them had a tab on their website that said our story. And you went and it was their resume. So many of us are CFPs. So many of us have spent this long in financial planning. It wasn't a story. It was a list of qualifications. Now, don't get me wrong. If I'm looking for a financial advisor, I want to know they're qualified. I want to know they're experienced. But that's not a story. Tell me how your qualifications and experience means I'm going to get to retire and not have to worry about running out of money. I mean, tell me about a client that had a similar problem to mine that you served. Find a way to do that. And that's where communication and the customer experience is really linked, because the goal of the story is to have an emotional impact. And the goal of the customer experience, as opposed to service, is that the experience makes it feel personalized and creates an emotional connectivity. And when we do that, then we transcend transaction. And that's what creates the repeat and referral business and an employee team that we all desire.
Wow, I love the phrase transcend reaction or transaction. Really good.
Thank you.
Hey, before we go any further, you have something that you are giving everyone right now. So let's talk about what that is, and we'll put on the screen how to get it.
Oh, great.
What are you giving everybody?
Dan, we've been friends forever, and I wanted to provide something free for your followers and your folks to take a look at. So I put those 4 cornerstones of clarity, creativity, communication, and customer experience focus in a PDF white paper called the 4 smart strategies to stand out and earn more. And it goes a little deeper into those 4. And it also has some very specific things that everybody can do, regardless of your industry, regardless of your organizational size, to start right now to move on the pathway of creating distinction to the point that you become an iconic organization. So that's free for everybody. That's part of what you do, Dan, and it's a privilege as always to spend any time with you. But that's something that everybody can take advantage of and download for free.
Well, great. And by the way, before we go any further, we have more to do together yet. But before we go any further, if they want to find out more about you, what's the best website? Because I know you have several, but what's the best place for people to go?
The best place is just scottmckain.com. That will link you to my blog posts and other resources that we have. Many of them are free resources that we want to provide. And I think that's one of the things that organizations need to do, is to find ways to help before you attempt to sell. And I try to practice what I preach and find ways that we can help organizations. So scottmckain.com will take you to information about my speaking, about my books, but most importantly, to other free resources that your community can access.
Yeah, okay, good. And we put that up on the screen so people can see it. All right. So anything else on that you could give as a strategy now, an actionable strategy for people that would say, I like this idea of being distinctive and creating an iconic culture and an iconic experience. What are some things, if we were to do a little checklist of do 1, 2, 3, 4, what could we give them as some actions?
In the book Iconic, I've found the 5 factors of iconic performance. And one of the 5 that really shocked me through the research, Dan, and it's something people could do right away, is go negative. Now, I don't mean that we become a negative culture. I don't mean that we become negative individuals. But there was a study at Texas A&M University that said, in many cases, SWOT analysis have become irrelevant because organizations are afraid of taking the weaknesses and threats to leaders out of fear that the leader will presume that the person bringing the information is negative. So what we have to be willing to do is to say, as leaders, what's the worst thing I've heard about our organization lately? Are we going deeply enough? For example, a quick example. You go to a store and you're an upset customer. You complain. Well, what do they tend to do? They tend to placate you. Oh, here's $10 off your next visit, or we'll give you a free dessert, or we want you to walk away happy so you don't give us a bad review on Yelp. But they don't drill into the process that created that upset customer to begin with. They don't go negative enough to say, okay, what do we have to fix so we don't continue to manufacture a percentage of upset customers. We have to be willing to go negative to figure out what we've got to do to make certain that there's not friction in the process, whether it's going negative with well, I'll give you one example. The company we're working with now, with accounts receivable, everything that team was rewarded on was collecting accounts, which meant they got very aggressive with their customers. And they were responsible for losing customers because they were doing what the organization rewarded for that particular group. Only by going negative and saying, how do we fix this? Where is this wrong? Did they change the rewarding of how those people, now it's not how did you collect, it's how do you retain good customers and set them on a payment plan so that we keep the customer and we get the payments that we want. Those kinds of things are specifics in what you can find when you're willing to drop the ego and hear negative information.
Well, one of the things that ties into what you just said is in the anticipatory learning system, and that is you get the behaviors you reward.
Yes.
And most of the time, we're rewarding either an old behavior or the wrong behavior. How many times have people said, well, we taught the sales team the new stuff, but they're still doing the old stuff. We taught them how to, to be consultative and to not be transactional, but to create relationships. But they go back to the transaction. They go back to the low end. And why? Because we're still rewarding them in the old way.
We're paying them on commission, right? I mean, the commission structure hasn't changed. Yeah, you're exactly right.
So in other words, one of the things I'd like you to do after this is over is to look at your reward system and ask yourself, what are the behaviors we're rewarding that we don't really want to get? And change your reward system. You know what? You'll find yourself elevating your organization quite a bit. Any others like that? I love your examples too. I think it's always great to tie in examples.
I went online and I asked for examples specifically about that one, Dan. And one of the funny ones, amusing ones I got, and I apologize for the language, but this is exactly what they wrote me. It was a community drive to raise money for cancer patients and cancer treatment. And so they sponsored a run every year. And there were certain things as they were setting it up that weren't going exactly right. So they got a binder and they called it, and again, pardon the language, but they called it the bitch book. And when somebody came up and complained, you wrote something down in the bitch book. Now they rewarded the volunteer that was able to write the most things down. But now in the year until the next program, they had the list of the things they needed to fix. And they looked at it very positively, and they rewarded people for that. I'll give you another quick one. Being a sports fan, I've always heard that defense wins championships, right? And so your defense has to be good. You know something? Statistically, that's not accurate. More Super Bowl winners have had a better offense statistically than the one that had the better defense. And in fact, the vast majority of playoff games were won by the higher rated offensive team, not the higher defensive team in terms of the rankings. And it got me thinking, it's offense that wins championships in business as well. It gets back to what you were saying earlier. It's saying I'm not going to copy the competition. I'm going to chart the course of, and that's where what you do with the anticipatory leadership aspect is so visionary, because I'm going to look at the future differently than my competition. I'm going to see the hard trends and the soft trends differently than my competition, and I'm going to play offense and do the things that will make my organization distinctive. And that's where I think our philosophies are so compatible and intertwined, is that, how do you play offense if you're not able to see the future? And that's what you teach people to do.
Well, another way to slice and dice it is one of the ways that companies have worked at dealing with the rapid pace of technological change is to focus on being agile. And agility came from sports. The faster you can react to a disruption after it disrupts, the more agile you are, the better. The faster you can react to a problem after it occurs, the better. And that's half of the coin, the reactionary side, the defense side. The offensive side, the anticipatory side, is anticipating disruptions before the disruption. So that disruption becomes a choice. Anticipating problems before you have them so you can pre-solve them, or you can let them play out. So you said it exactly right. There is offense and defense. And by the way, you got to be able to be good at both. But I would suggest that most companies are 99% defense.
Yes.
They're not doing very much of the offense. That's why I've been so excited about being getting this anticipatory message out there. And by the way, getting you in, because I think we totally align on that philosophy.
It's funny. One of the lines I wrote in Iconic is the genesis of all disruption is dissatisfaction. That's where it all begins. Steve Jobs talked when they said, "Why did you create the iPhone?" He said, "Because we hated the phones we had." Right? I mean, it wasn't that it was this a big marketing ploy of how you extend Apple's. It was like the genesis of it was we hated the phones we had. Well, that's why what you teach to me is so critical to the success of the future of any organization. Is how do you anticipate where those dissatisfactions are going to come that are potentially disruptive in the future? And how many can we talk about of, from Nokia ignoring the iPhone, or Steve Ballmer at Microsoft saying it'll never last, to on and on and on. I posted on LinkedIn here recently the letter that a record company executive sent a guy named Paul Heyman, not Paul Heyman, Paul Haysworth. Anyway, it's the real name of Bono. that why they were rejecting his band called U2, because they didn't sound like what bands sounded like currently. He didn't anticipate that there was going to be a future. I'll kind of wrapping away with this, Dan, is that one of the things about that what you teach is I have found so important and dovetails with what I talk about, integrates with what I talk about, is I was involved in the entertainment business for years and wrote a book called All Business is Show Business. It was my first business book. And if you look back, when Frank Sinatra was young and was a hit, everybody said, who is the next Sinatra? Well, it was Elvis, who was nothing like Sinatra. And then who was going to be the next Elvis? Well, it was the Beatles, who are nothing like Elvis. Who was going to be the next Beatles? Well, it was Michael Jackson, who was nothing like the Beatles. And then if you look at record sales, interestingly enough, who was the next Michael Jackson was Garth Brooks, who was about as far from Michael Jackson as one could imagine. So any organization that thinks, or any leader that thinks, how do I be the next by imitating what is popular now, is truly missing the boat. And that's why what you practice, and then using that as a method to become distinctive and raise to the iconic level, really is the vaccine for any organization to not be disrupted in the future.
And the opportunity is so huge. I wrote an article a couple of months ago, and a lot of people loved it. It was called "Everything Sucks, and That's Perfect." And the reality is everything does suck. I mean, is this the best suit you could have? Is this the best seat you're sitting in right now? Are these the best glasses they could ever make? And the answer is no. Everything can be made better because perfection is impossible. Nothing is perfect. Everything can be improved. Everything. So that means, wow, there's a lot of work for us all out there. There's a lot of things to innovate on. Pick anything, and you know what? Make it better. You can. Absolutely. And if you look at some tools, you'll see there are some ways of making it better. So if you have customers that are unhappy, great. What a gift, especially if they speak up. The best thing that you can, when I've given, like you, thousands of speeches around the world, as you have, and most of the time, 99% of the time, everybody tells you how great you are, which is nice to hear, but it doesn't help you improve. Right. The ones that I love is when somebody says, I was a little confused about.
Absolutely.
Well, to me, I feel like giving them $1,000 for that. Or if you're about to be in my audience next week, maybe 100. But anyway, what I want to hear is, how could I be better? Because the goal is to raise the bar on yourself and to continually to do that. And you can't do that with praise. You can only do that with finding out where is there confusion, where it could be a little bit better, where is, those kind of things.
And Dan, one of the things I've always loved about your approach, and one of the things I've tried to emulate from your approach, is that to become an anticipatory leader or an anticipatory organization, you don't have to break the bank to do it. No. It's about changing how you think, and that thinking and the changes that are stimulated by that. And I follow that leadership with creating distinction. I mean, a lot of people come at the beginning thinking that I'm going to talk about, how much do you, the customer experience, for example. Well, we're going to do coupons, or we're going to do giveaways, or we're going to do all this for our customers. And it's not that at all. it's changing how you think, and that thinking creates cultural changes internally that then are experienced by customers externally. And that's one of the things I would really emphasize to all of your viewers is that these changes are not changes that are going to break the bank. They are changes, though, that will build the bank because you change how you think.
Yeah, exactly. Matter of fact, change how you think, you change your results.
Yeah.
And as a leader, one of the things that all leaders do, and I think you do on stage, and I know I do on stage, is I change how people think without telling them what to think. You see, I
Perfect.
don't
Yes.
have the right to tell anyone what to think, but I can change how you think about the future, how you think about competition, or how you think about being iconic, or how you think about whatever the subject might be. So it's all about, if you can change how you think, you change behaviors. You change behaviors, you change results.
And there's one of the problems I'd suggest to you, Dan, when we were talking earlier about how everything has changed. One of the ways that everything has changed via social media and through all of the things that are available to us now is that it's so easy to find confirmation for the way that we're already thinking. And it doesn't matter. I don't care if you think the world is populated by green people from Mars, that they're among us. You'll be able to find a website that will agree with you about that. And what we have to do is to break out of that trap that what we're seeking is confirmation, not information. And that we cannot think in the way that you're talking about, Dan, if all we're doing is seeking sources that confirm what we already believe. We need our thinking challenged. And when our thinking is challenged, we may find out, hopefully, we may find out, hey, we're right. This is a great thing to learn. But as long as all we're seeking is something that's going to confirm our previous behavioral and thinking patterns, we're not going to grow. We're not going to do these changes necessary.
Yeah, well, it's all about growth, and it's all about learning, and that means keeping your opportunity antenna up all the time, looking for opportunities, looking for new insights, and again, the bigger the challenge to your thinking, when there is a game changer. I remember, if I go way back, I've been around for a long time on this planet, and I play a number of instruments. But back in college, I put myself through school playing, a lead guitar and rock band and so on. And I remember when like a Jimi Hendrix came out.
Yeah.
What did he do? Well, he was a game changer. Changed the game. By the way, if you go back in time, the Beatles were a game changer. Michael Jackson was a game changer. We're just going along with your list. Garth Brooks was a game changer. The point is, whenever you have these moments in time, what is really happening? Well, it isn't confirmation of my old way of thinking that led him to that. It is, it is the game-changing nature of it. And by the way, that all came from the inside out. Didn't come from the outside in, because unlike change, transformation, whether it's personal or business, always comes from the inside out. If it's something coming from the outside in, I'd call it change. And by the way, if all you're doing is changing something, you're falling behind, because we're in beyond exponential times right now. But if you're truly transforming it, as any game changer does, now you're onto something. How does that fit in, and how can we use distinction and, again, creating iconic organizations as a game changer? I mean, you've given some examples, but I'm just stating it in another way to try to pull a little bit more of that wisdom you have out of you.
Well, and Dan, when you were saying that, one of the things that struck me is there are very few books that I would put on the level of your book about the anticipatory organization, anticipatory leaders, and your discussions there. But one I would suggest, this is right there, is Dr. Clayton Christensen's talking about the innovator's dilemma, where that once we create an innovation, then we build our organization around the structures to protect that innovation instead of continuing that process that created the innovation in the first place. And I see distinctive and particularly iconic organizations as those that are constantly willing to grow and to change. They understand there's a balance between who and what we are, but yet they're constantly looking for, how do we continue to lead the pack? How do we continue to be innovative? How do we continue to do, how do we fight with ourselves? I was doing a program in Amsterdam for a technology group. And I asked them, I said, if a competitor was going to come in here and really damage your market share, they were really going to take business from you, what would they be doing that you aren't? We filled a flip chart with ideas.
Oh, what a
And,
great one. I love that one, Scott.
and so then I said to the owner of the business, I said, well, right now you have three choices. I said, right now you can either look at these things and say, how do we structure, how do we do this in our business to prevent somebody else from kicking our tail because they do what we're not doing? Or secondly, you start a competing business that does these things and competes with your current structure. Or third, somebody's going to come in and kick your tail. I mean, you've got three choices. And interestingly enough, he decided to start a competing company and that I've followed with great interest. So now between these two competing companies that have the same ownership but approaches the marketplace differently, they have dominant market share in that part of the Netherlands for what they do. So
well, here's an interesting tag to that. I had one of the big health insurance companies in the United States, one of the big ones. A group of them did the anticipatory organization, the learning system. Wasn't the CEO and the top people. It was kind of that next group. And usually it's the top people that do it. But in this organization, a notch down, and they got all excited about all the concepts, came up with all this new stuff. And they tried to take it to the top people, but because they didn't understand how to skip your biggest problem, because they didn't understand the certainty of hard trends, they kind of got put aside. And I remember talking with them about it because they were very frustrated. And they said, if we can't get this done here, we're starting our own business and do it outside of this company. And we had the people leaving and starting the competition because that company wouldn't do it. By the way, that would today be called part of the Great Resignation.
Yeah, it sure would be.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So, do I want?
And at their point, it's an intelligent resignation, right? I mean, that's.
So do we want our best people leaving to be our best guy in our worst competition? Or do we want to let it happen on the inside? One other thing that I wrote about in my book, Flash Foresight, was to create a tomorrow lab. And an internal tomorrow lab where you have people that actually have time, because that's the problem. You never give any innovators any time to innovate. They got to keep doing what they've always done.
They're too busy. Yeah,
but you give them a time to not be busy crisis managers, but instead to be opportunity managers. Create a tomorrow lab and use the new tools to create the future now within the organization. Or, as you said, create a tomorrow lab outside funded by the mothership. And why would you want to have the mothership fund the external company? And that is because the internal company is so big, it will bog it down with bureaucracy and the legacy tech and all of that. And you need to move forward faster. So that whole tomorrow lab idea that you're talking about, I think, is really ripe. We're getting close to our to the end. Let me put up one more time Scott's giveaway. I want to make sure that you go there. Make sure you do that. I mean, these books he does are really great. One other thing, let's put your website back up there again. Go to his website, and you got so many great books. I only listed a few of them. I mean, Taxi Terry and all of those. I mean, holy cow, those are killer great books that really help you create what we've been talking about here. I recommend going for it, and I'd get Iconic right away, and maybe that'd be a good place to start.
That's a great place to start because the beginning of the book, Iconic, kind of summarizes what we've talked about distinction. So you get the whole enchilada when you get Iconic. So
all right, any last thing that you would say to everyone out there if you'd sum up? Here's what I'd like you to do if you're only going to do one thing. Could I get you to come up with something like that?
Yeah, if you're only going to do one thing, and I hope you do more, but you got to start with one, right? And it is what you talked about earlier, Dan. Do the research and try to understand what do customers really expect right now. And then how do you deliver a compelling experience that exceeds those expectations and make you stand out? Look, at the end of the day, we look at customers and we think customers choose us. That's not the whole story. Customers choose you instead of the other alternatives that are available to them in the marketplace. So it's about selection. It's about choice. And the fact of the matter is, sameness doesn't get you chosen. Dan, with you and Sharon, or with Tammy and me, I promise, I didn't get down on one knee, look her in the eye and say, honey, will you marry me? You're just like every other woman I've ever dated. right? I mean, you
Yeah.
talk about what makes you special, what makes you different, what makes you unique, and why this is so distinctive. And that's what you want to bring into a relationship. Well, it's the same thing in the relationship we have with customers. We're chosen for our differences, not just our similarities. And so, what we have to do is to say, what can we do in a distinctive manner that will exceed customer expectations and take us to a point that we are iconic?
Yeah, when I launched Anticipatory Organization, the book, a number of years ago, what I did was something unusual. I did what actually had never been done before because I like doing that.
Yeah,
I gave away a hardcover copy of
I
the book
remember.
for free.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we'll just put that up so that people can see what it looked like. And they went to theaobook.com. And what they could do, I said, oh, you have to pay shipping, but I'm not going to gouge you on shipping. You can see it's just a small amount, but I'll give you a hardcover copy for free. Why? Because I know you're going to like it so much, you'll recommend it to a friend. And
Right.
that book ended up being a bestseller because of that.
Yeah.
So most people give away digital stuff. I gave away something solid and worked out great. Now, again, will I do it the next time? No, I've already done it.
You
I
done
will
it. You're going to do
I will
something different.
innovate again because I ride a Harley Davidson motorcycle because there's no reverse. You see, I can't
I love that.
I can't go back, and neither can any of us. We can't go back. Actually, the good old days are ahead of us. They just don't look like the days behind us, but we have to make those good old days by becoming an iconic organization, by learning how to exceed expectations, as we've talked about, by being innovative, and by doing the very things that you've talked about to achieve distinction. Scott, I really want to thank you for being with us today. It was really a pleasure. I know people are going to want to watch this again and again. And
It's always great spending time with you, my friend. I appreciate you more than I have words to describe. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I continue to follow what you say and read you and listen to you religiously. So thank you very much.
all right, take care.